It was the year 2050. Miguel Alvarez turned on the radio inside his old yellow cab as he crawled through Times Square. The crackle of static, mixed with a salsa station that barely reached the airwaves. A sound from another time. Outside, the streets glided with thousands of driverless taxis. Silent, flawless, breathing as one mechanical rhythm. Their glass shells shone under neon billboards that read, "AI Taxi, always on time." And there he was. Maybe the last man left, sitting in a yellow cab, waiting for the next passenger. Back in the 20th and early 21st century, the yellow cab was more than a car. It was an icon, woven into the very fabric of New York City. It appeared everywhere, flashing across movie screens, printed on postcards, sampled in hip-hop tracks. For millions, that glowing yellow vehicle was New York itself. For over a century, taxis kept the city alive. A raised hand meant a cab would stop, day or night. They carried Wall Street traders rushing downtown, tourists snapping photos, lovers spilling out of Broadway shows. They carried secrets too, whispered confessions, arguments, lives unraveling between red lights. For families like Miguel's, taxis were survival. His father had come from the Dominican Republic with nothing, building a life one fare at a time. He used to tell Miguel, "This city speaks every language, and in a cab you hear them all." He was right. They weren't just drivers. They were storytellers, guardians of the city's pulse. But nothing in New York lasted forever. Progress crept in like a slow tide, and before anyone realized it, the streets once ruled by human drivers belonged to someone or something else. In 2025, Uber and Lyft had already toppled the old medallion system. Many drivers lost everything. Bankruptcy became as common as traffic jams. Some thought the rideshare wars were the end, but they were only the beginning. By 2030, the first self-driving taxis rolled through Manhattan. At first, they were limited, geo-fenced routes, corporate experiments. People laughed at the boxy machines crawling around like oversized toys, but laughter faded as their numbers grew. 2035 marked the true turning point. After years of lobbying, the city approved AI taxis as safer, cheaper, more reliable. Fewer accidents, no drunk drivers, no lawsuits. Insurance companies rushed to underwrite fleets of machines instead of people. By 2040, 70% of all rides in New York were handled by autonomous vehicles. Human drivers were reduced to a tolerated minority, still visible, but no longer trusted. In 2047, the city shut down the last human taxi garages. Licenses for flesh and blood drivers were revoked, the way one retires an old subway line. Officially, they were extinct. And yet, in 2050, Miguel Alvarez, 65 years old, clung to a steering wheel like a relic, navigating a city that no longer noticed him. Miguel had been behind that wheel for more than 40 years, and the memories still clung to him like the smell of worn leather. He remembered the rush of Friday nights when theaters spilled crowds onto sidewalks, tourists waving their arms in the glow of neon. The streets pulsed with voices, laughter, and the sharp whistle of someone desperate to catch a ride. He remembered Wall Street traders tossing him $165 bills. Their ties loosened, their eyes glazed with exhaustion. He remembered the night a young woman begged him to drive faster, when he carried her to the hospital just in time to welcome a new life. He remembered strangers who poured their secrets into the back seat, as if his cab were a confessional. But now, the back seat was almost always empty. A handful of tourists still sought him out, calling it the authentic experience, as though he were a museum exhibit. A few filmmakers hired him, hoping to capture nostalgia before the last of his kind disappeared. But most days, the cracked leather stayed silent. When passengers did climb in, they reminded him of what he had lost. They praised the AI taxis, how they glided through traffic without hesitation, how their cameras watched over children, how they spoke every language and never took a wrong turn. Parents said they finally slept at night. Older riders said it felt like freedom. For them, maybe it was. For Miguel, it was a reminder of obsolescence. His income had collapsed. His friends had vanished into other jobs or into nothing at all. The garages where they once drank coffee and shared stories were shuttered. At old taxi stands, only ghost signs remained. their paint fading, taxi only. And when he glanced into his rearview mirror now, most nights he saw nothing but emptiness. While outside, AI cabs streamed past like a river of glass and light, indifferent to the man still clinging to his wheel. New York in 2050 was efficient, too efficient. Towering billboards beamed messages across the sky. AI taxi, safe, fast, always there. The streets were lined with silent vehicles that glided like ghosts. Their glass cabins glowed softly in the dark. No steering wheels, no pedals, no human drivers. Passengers stepped inside and the doors shut like elevators, whisking them away. The hum of traffic was gone. There were no horns, no arguments with cabbies, no mistakes. The city had become a symphony of automation. And then there was Miguel, his cab, a relic, coughing and sputtering, paint peeling, radio hissing old songs. A photograph of his wife and kids hung from the rearview mirror. The fabric on the seats was worn, but it carried decades of stories. When people saw him drive past, some pointed, others shook their heads, but most didn't even notice. The machines owned the road now, but behind that perfect efficiency lay a silence deeper than traffic ever was. When the cabs disappeared, so did the people who drove them. Tens of thousands of families, most of them immigrants like Miguel. Calculate the area of a circle with a radius of 5 meters. The neighborhoods of Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx that once thrived on taxi money began to crumble. Diners that served drivers at 3 a.m. closed their doors. Repair shops and gas stations that kept their cars alive boarded up their windows. Entire blocks went quiet. Yes, the city celebrated at first. Accidents dropped. Rides became cheaper. The headlines read, "AI taxi saves lives." Young professionals praised the freedom. No more waiting in the rain. No more awkward small talk. Just a smooth ride at the tap of a phone. Parents called it peace of mind, trusting cameras and algorithms more than any stranger behind a wheel. Students loved how the cars spoke every language, turning the city into a place where no one ever felt lost. And while working families fell, others rose higher than ever. Tech corporations secured billion-dollar contracts to run the fleets. Investors reaped profits as predictable as the algorithms themselves. Politicians boasted about a safer, smarter city, while communities like Miguel's faded into silence. Efficiency hadn't just erased jobs. It had shifted power upward, leaving the streets polished and quiet, but emptier than they had ever been. And though the lights were brighter and the rides smoother, the city had never felt the same. After the engines went silent, the struggle to survive took new shapes. A few of Miguel's friends ended up in glass control rooms, rebranded as AI fleet monitors. They sat behind glowing screens, watching dots crawl across digital maps, waiting for the rare moment a machine hesitated. From steering wheels to keyboards, their hands found a new kind of captivity. Others leaned into nostalgia. They started tour companies that sold a taste of the past. A ride in a real yellow cab, with a real human at the wheel. Miguel was sometimes called for those gigs. For an hour, he circled the city, telling stories about a New York that tourists never knew existed. They laughed, they tipped, they took their pictures. And then they stepped out of his cab and into the glass shells of AI taxis waiting at the curb. Many tried retraining. The government promised opportunities in logistics, coding, or data supervision, but most weren't built for that. Driving was never just a paycheck. It was an identity, a rhythm in their blood. And you can't retrain someone out of who they are. So Miguel stayed, not because it made sense, but because this was who he was. He was a taxi driver, and he would be until the very last ride ended. Miguel had driven his cab for more than 40 years. Through that windshield, he had watched the city reinvent itself. Skylines rising, fashions changing, whole generations growing up in the back seat of his car. His cab was never just metal and wheels. It was a vessel of connection, a place where love stories began, where arguments sparked, where laughter and tears shared the same ride. Now, he might be the last one left. And truth be told, the machines had delivered on their promises. The streets were safer, accidents were rare, rides were cheaper, faster, and always on time. For the millions who depended on the city, that was a gift. A nurse no longer missed her shift because a driver took a wrong turn. A mother no longer feared hailing a cab late at night. An immigrant no longer struggled with language. The car simply translated. Progress gave people peace of mind, even as it took away Miguel's place in it. But still, something small had slipped away. The chatter, the jokes, the advice from a stranger who knew the city like the back of his hand. It wasn't enough to stop progress, not enough to outweigh the convenience, but enough to remind anyone paying attention that New York had lost a little piece of its soul. Efficiency had won, yet Miguel sometimes wondered if anyone noticed what was left behind. Miguel Alvarez, 65 years old, sat in his yellow taxi, the last piece in this noisy world. No one knew if history would remember drivers like him, or if they would simply fade into the city's forgotten layers, like old subway lines buried beneath the streets. Progress had already chosen its path. What remained was the question each of us must answer. When technology reshapes not just how we work, but who we are, what part of ourselves do we hold on to? This was his story. What will ours be? Subscribe to The Last Human Job and hit the bell to see the next future story.